Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about UVs for our characters. So we could just throw this into Maya and do it all manually in there, but I like to use ZBrush and ZBrush's polygroups to help assist with that initial UV layout. So I'm going to select the body and I'm going to turn on my polyframe, and we can see here I have all of my polygroups already pre-made, but just to go over how to create polygroups again, since we've already done our retopology, I would recommend using the Z modeler brush and selecting poly loops. So if I zoom in here, and I'm going to click on all low over here, and then with my Z modeler brush, if I hover over a face and I hold down spacebar, I can select polygroup and poly loop, and then I can just assign a new group to this loop. And if I'm still pressing down on my mouse button, if I tap Alt on the keyboard, it's going to change the color of that group. And then I can, select two different loops, and then if I hover over a space again, I can choose polygroup island, and if I choose island, it's going to fill in that whole area. Or if I were to choose polygroup all, even though these groups are separated by this middle yellow area, if I click now, it's going to group that whole bunch. Grouping your polygroups in these areas where you might want UVs, this is actually quite a lot. I think I would probably, make this all one group. I'm going to leave this for our purposes, and I'm going to unmask just in case you guys have anything masked. Remember, you could make groups from masking as well. If I mask out an area, I can go over here to polygroups and I can group masked, right? And then I have that area. So like this area would be its own UV shell. So I'm going to unmask everything though. Let's just go with this. So to get UVs out of this, if I'm looking over here on my right-hand panel and I open up this UV map section, ours is most likely, this is going to be all grayed out, okay? There's not going to be anything here right now. We need to create our UV. So if I go up to my Z plugin, down to UV master, this is automatically going to be set to that. We want to unwrap our mesh. So I'm going to go Z plugin, UV master, and I'm going to turn on polygroups. If you still have symmetry, you can keep that on. It's just going to keep those seams the same. If your model is asymmetrical, you'll want to turn that off. And we'll just click on unwrap. And then once we do that, it'll say it's unwrapped. And over here in my UV map, I now have this ability to delete my UVs, and that's usually the indicator that this mesh has UVs on it. So let's say I want to look at what these UV shells look like. I can go over to my Z plugin again. And if I click on flatten, I'm going to get this error that says you can only flatten without subdivision levels. So I'm going to go back up to Z plugin, down to this option here that says work on clone. And I'm going to click on that. And if I come up here, I can see I actually have a new clone tool up here. But if I go back to my Z plugin again, down to UV master, and I click flatten now, it gives me basically my single UV shell. And I'm not going to worry about any of this for now. We're going to take this into Maya and clean it up and flatten it out a bit better. But this gives me that initial cut so I don't have to like choose edges in Maya and cut that way. It gives me a little bit more control. I just think ZBrush is more friendly in that regard. So if I go back up to Z plugin and I go to unflatten, it brings me back to my model, but really I need to click back on my original tool. And you can usually tell which one that is because this one has an 11 next to it. That means I have 11 subtools here. This one doesn't have any number indicating, so it's just there's only one tool there. So this has multiple subtools. This one only has the one. So I'm just going to go back to this one. And we can double check that this one still has UVs by going to UV map. As long as that delete UV is available, again, we don't want to click it, but as long as that's there, that's saying there are UVs here. Let's talk exporting really quick. I'm going to unsolo this. I want to do my UVs on the lowest subdivision level. However, some of you might be a little too low for what you might actually be wanting to work with. So my lowest subdivision level on my character is almost 20K. I think like that's a really solid amount. Definitely enough for deformation inside of Maya for when we animate. I think somewhere in the 13 to 20,000. You can probably even aim for 10K if you know, wanted to, but that's probably the range that I would go for. So if you needed to, you could go up a subdivision level to like subdivision level 2 and just export from this level. So when we export our FBX, remember whatever level we're on is the level we're going to export. We don't get all of our different subdivision levels. So what we want to do in order to prep for Substance Painter, in order to bake our high poly details, is to go to whatever subdivision level we want to export as our low subdivision level. And you could delete lower if you know that you never want to go back down to a lower one. So that's an option here, is to just click on delete lower. And then that way you don't have to worry about making sure that you go up one. Because we do have this option here that says all low, and it automatically sets all of them to the lowest subdivision level. And then for the eyes, if you are using the default spheres for your eyes, if you don't want to bring 16,000 polys in for your eyes, unfortunately, we can't use the reconstruct subdiv because there are triangles, right? If we zoom in here. So we can either deal with it, we could replace them with other spheres, or you can use the ZModeler brush and zoom in here and choose collapse, poly loop. And if we click on that, it's going to delete that poly loop that sorry, it's not going to delete it, it's going to collapse it. And that's going to lower that poly count. But you'll notice here when I did that on this area, I sort of collapsed that point here. So sometimes it's not exactly worth it unless I delete this poly loop. And if I zoom in here and, delete that, and then I can start collapsing these, but then I would have to come in and then bridge them again. So I think I would probably leave those the same, but if you wanted to, you could collapse some of them that go around this way. So that alone took off like almost 1,000 polys. So you could just spend time collapsing these, or you can replace them with new spheres that are already lower poly, or you can just leave them as is at the 16K. So I'll just leave it at that. We took off 4,000. It's not going to break your model to have something that high, but yeah, so we'll leave it like this. So I have my eyes, the body, the cloth, and my jacket. So to prepare for Substance Painter, we need to export a high and low poly version. The low poly one, again, is the one that we're going to create our UVs on. So what we need to do is rename everything. So I'm going to rename this one, we'll call this jacket, and I'm going to do underscore low. For this one, I'm going to rename it underscore low. And this one, I'm going to name body underscore low. So then I have all of these. I'm on my lowest subdivision level for everything. And I'm going to go up to Z plugin, FBX export import. I'm going to choose visible and export, and I'm gonna name this character underscore low underscore 2 UV so that I know that this is the version that I still need to UV, and then later I'll export from Maya my UV'd version. And that's just so I know later and I don't get confused why my low poly model doesn't have any UVs on it. So I'll hit save. And then we're going to go to our highest subdivision level. So I'm just going to click on this all high, and I'm going to rename all of these now the same thing, but underscore high. And this is so that when we get into Substance Painter, we can match by mesh name. It's really helpful for when you have things that are like close together, rather than Substance Painter guessing which meshes are supposed to be baked together. So we'll do it like this. And this time I'm going to think about what materials I'm going to have on my mesh, because ideally we're going to export our high poly versions as a FBX according to the material set that we assign. So if you're not using UDIMs and you're assigning separate materials, I would export probably just my body in one. So I'm going to go Z plugin and I'm going to choose selected, and I'm going to write export, and this is body high, and I'll hit save. And then I'm going to hide this, and maybe I'm going to have all of this on one set, or maybe I'm just going to have the clothing on another set. So I'm going to go up to Z plugin, and this time I'm going to choose visible, export, and I can rename this clothing high. And then I can do the same for the eyes as well. And then we can open Maya. So in Maya, I'm going to import my character low to UV, and we can see that it comes in here really tiny. It's really important at this point that you do not scale it. I know that it's hard to work with something this small, but because we are going to be baking our high poly version on top of our low poly, we need them to be in the exact same location. So we definitely don't want to scale anything at this point. We can scale things later after we've exported our low UVs to be baked inside of Substance Painter. So like when we're getting ready to rig and stuff, we can do that then, but definitely don't want to scale anything now. So I'm just going to select everything and zoom in on it. And let's just look at our UVs. So I'm going to go up to UV editor. So we can see these are the same UVs that I saw in ZBrush, and these are for my body. So I can select all of them. If I go right click UV shell and select them all, and we can go to unfold and click on unfold. Now, you might get this warning here to fix non-manifold geometry. It's possible that in ZBrush, when we made our UVs or something, that we're getting this error. I'm just going to click on fix, and we can see that my mesh gets really wonky. And this may happen to you, and if it doesn't, that's great. If it does, it's a really easy fix. So we're just going to select the mesh, go up to mesh display, and choose set to face, and it's going to flip everything so that all of my normals are still facing the right way. That's essentially what's happening, is that our like certain vertices are now facing the wrong direction. But you can see now that my mesh is all, you know, it's all blocky. All we need to do is go back up to mesh display and choose soften edge. And when I do that, it's going to soften everything back again. So that's how you fix that error. So now that I'm looking at this, I can see better where ZBrush decided to cut my UVs. Again, these are like the different polygroups that I had, but it will create that like center line to cut the UV. So let's say I don't like that this edge is right on the front of my leg, right? It's right here. I think it would be better to have it hidden more on the inside of the leg. So we can just, UV shell, select this UV so we can see where it is. And then we can go to our edge. We can select this edge by clicking on the first edge and the last edge of that line. And in our UV toolkit, go into cut and sew them together. I'm not gonna worry about my UV shell at this moment, but if we go back into object mode, I can see that line is gone. And I'm going to come into my side view and decide which edge loop I want this to now cut along. So I'm gonna go back to edge and I'm gonna select the first one, follow the line down, and double click on the second one and click cut, so that when I go back to my UV shell and I select it and I click unfold, it unfolds along that edge now. So that's how you would go about cleaning up for UVs. For characters, generally going along the inner areas, often where like your clothing seams are. So on the sides of the torso and underneath the arm are great places to put seams. Same thing for the inner leg and underneath the body. Again, around the fingertips is a great place to put that cut. But essentially, that's how you would go about it. And then I like to select everything once I'm done and go to Arrange and Layout. I like to orient my shells and choose Layout because, I personally like the layout. It automatically sizes everything proportionally. So if I turn on my checker, all of these checkers are the same size. But my way is not the only way to do your UVs. If you are extremely particular, you can do it a different way, but this does seem to work okay for me. Yeah, you could orient all of yours by hand so that everything is going in the same direction. But that's up to you. So that's how we would go about it. For assigning materials, remember when we pre-decided our exports for our high poly, essentially I'm going to add a new material to just my character. So I'm going to go to assign new material, and we will be rendering in Arnold. You can always change this later, but it is easier if you assign it first. So new material, Arnold, AI standard surface, and we can just rename this. I have a habit of naming all of my materials with the M underscore and then a description of what it is. So M body. And then I'm going to select my two pieces of clothing because I exported a high poly version of just my clothing. So I'm going to select both of those and assign the same material to both of them. So assign new material, Arnold, AI standard surface, And I'm gonna call this one M underscore clothing. And then I'll do the same for the eyes. Assign new material, Arnold AI standard surface, M underscore eyes. So my character has 3 materials assigned to it. That's how you do your UVs for your character.